Welcome back, everyone. We have Ethan Chiu here with us talking about how he built his and maintained the first line online Python linter using Flask. Welcome, Ethan.
Hello, thank you for the introduction. So I'll be talking about how I started learning web programming using Flask. Python Buddy was actually the first website I created ever. So super excited to talk to you all about what I've learned throughout the process. So quick intro about me is I'm currently a student at Berkeley and I'm currently interning at GitHub working on their CI/CD team. And I've interned at Etsy and a few startups before. And at Berkeley, I teach the Intro to CS course and also do conduct research on security, usable security specifically. And yeah, this first development library that I used is Flask, and I've used it for a variety of projects, including the project I'm going to talk about today, which is called Python Buddy. Use it for a lot of hackathon projects and just fun side projects. It's really easy to load up and just run and create whatever you have in mind. So it's pretty awesome. So I'll just jump right into my talk. So the motivations behind this talk is that I just want to share you the wonders of Flask in general. So as I mentioned before, this was my first web app that I have ever worked on. Originally, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to use to create this web app. I wanted to use something that was related to Python since that was the first language I learned. And the reasons why I love Flask is that it's simple to use. It's a low barrier of entry. If you look at the documentation, it's very accessible for all learners. And especially as a high schooler, when I first developed this, it was really easy to understand. And these are some of the concepts that I thought were really great for a project and specifically. So AJAX requests, databases, templating, and a lot of support for test-driven development. Yeah, and why I created Python Buddy. So Python Buddy is online syntax tracker and for Python. And in 2014, I was a community TA for this online course called Python, hosted by MIT, where I taught basic stuff about Python. Hold on. Yep. And after that, I started doing research under Professor Eni Musfaraya. I was a data set on that course, and we saw that there was a really high attrition rate of leaving within the first 2 weeks. And after digging through the data, I realized that it was due to a lot of the complexities of setting up a simple Python IDE. A lot of students found it really frustrating to set that up. I wanted to create an environment where students can just jump right into programming with aid of live syntax checking. So I created Python Buddy to address this issue. And yeah, so we can get into a demo really quickly. So I'll just use my localhost version. So if you see on my screen right here, it's just a simple simple demo of a potential error you might run into, such as unused in this function. And yeah, it basically just shows the messages here. And yeah, that's it. You can also run the code as well if you want. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And throughout the process, it's really exciting because I had a chance to ask a lot of questions on the web, on Stack Overflow and other forums to ask for help, since this was the first web app I ever developed. And I learned interesting things about working with others in the open source community and sharing ideas and debugging. And I think Flask is the perfect medium for learning those more soft skills type of things for software development. So the first thing I learned in Flask is AJAX requests. So basically what AJAX requests is allows web application its content without the user reloading the page. So if you didn't have AJAX requests, you'd have to refresh a page every time to get an update from the server. And I thought that was really cool, how you can just update the website without the user really knowing, I guess, all the logic behind it. And in Flask, it's super easy to handle. where you could just do something like at app.route like path and then like methods get and post, and then in like the client-side.js file you can just make that call to that route. And yeah, in the Python buddy code specifically, I can show a really quick example. So basically I had like one Ajax request, and that's like the whole web app. But it took a while to figure out how to do it, to be fair. But this just shows how powerful like the simplicity of Flask for handling these complex topics like Ajax requests is. So here you can see like I defined an Ajax request for like a post request. So like posting uh, data to our Flask server to get like the error messages back. So basically, if I open up the client side code, so if I open up the client side code, basically every time the user types in the text box, we fire an Ajax request to our backend server, the Flask server, and it runs like the pylinting library on that code. So this is the client-side code that does that, and that triggers the Ajax request in the server. And as you can see, it's like only like 20 lines of code, and it's like pretty simple. In the Python to thing, integrating this. And you can also configure like a new like testing database and simulate different requests. And this is something I want to like work on in the future for Python Buddy, is to add like more meaningful tests to test more user features when we add more customization. And some cool things that I've read about in the documentation that I want to explore more with is like testing with context, meaning like you can customize like the database and customize certain like context variables to load up interesting scenarios to test out in different edge cases. Cool. And then I think something that's really powerful for Flask, especially for like beginning programmers like myself at the time, was like it teaches you like a really important concept called like dry, where you like don't repeat yourself. And it really allows you to do that using like the Jinja templating engine, where you could just easily load different parts of the page really easily. So in this example here, like you can just use like this like curly brace notation to easily like import parts of your HTML file into certain parts. So I'm gonna load up this example here of how we use it in Python Buddy. So basically, this is our base HTML file. So this has like the baseline HTML that we'll import for like all of our like pages in the future. So as you can see, we have these like brackets that will denote like what part of the page we're in and such. So we can see that in like the main page here. So this is like the index.html. We extend the base.html, and then basically we will add this like block of code, like this def foo, for example. So right here, and that part will be loaded inside of the base.html. So I think that's like really cool, like how this allows for a lot of modularity for like more complex apps if you want to do that, as well as it teaches good like practices for like simple apps as well. And cool. So moving on to maintenance of the app. So something that is like really interesting about executing code online is like sandboxing. But there are also a lot of other security risks that are involved in like web app development in general. So there's something called like CSRF attacks. So that's when you like trick the victim into submitting like a malicious request, like such as like a post request. And it inherits like the identity and privileges of like the victim to perform an undesired function on the victim's behalf. And that's straight up taken from the OWASP website, and they have like a lot of great like resources for like security, and I definitely recommend people to read up on that. And Flask has like a great library to prevent this called like um, CSRF protection. So you can use that. And then also a common attack on the web for web apps is like an XSS attack. So that like allows you to load up like a malicious script on the website on the client side, which could like steal essential information like cookies. And the cool thing about like Flask and its integration of the Jinja template engine is that Jinja already has like built-in protections to like auto escape those scripts, so it won't be like loaded on the client side. And yeah, SQL injections. If you do have like a database, um, I think for Flask it's pretty simple too. You can escape like SQL values or use a library to prevent that. And going back to the first thing I talked about for security, so when I first created this um, online like Python linter as well as like executor, I didn't have any like sandboxing. So basically people could like run the code and just like run on my server, like run straight up Python code on my server. And Python's a scripting language. So people could like upload GIFs and like take over my server pretty easily. And I remember when I released this back in 2014 without any sandboxing. And the first thing that happened was someone wiped out my server and uploaded an interesting GIF. And that really gave me like a fresh perspective on like don't really trust the web necessarily on like what they do with your web app. You should always like think about security um, at the forefront when you're developing apps. So I think the saying is like you want to design with security at the focus, like never take anything for granted. So yeah, I wrote something in my blog about this that's more in depth, but it might be too long to talk about. But basically, I explored a lot of different avenues for like sandboxing Python code. And a lot of them are like very inefficient. There has been a lot of like open source initiatives and like research projects to sandbox Python. And basically it's very invisible. So basically my alternative is that I created a different version of Python Buddy that uses Docker to create an instance for each user. So basically like a microservice. So each user that is typing code is in their own virtual environment. And if they do something bad, I just ban their IP and they don't have access to the website. So yeah, that's how I avoided the sandboxing issue. And yeah, so something really cool about Flask is that it's really easy to like launch it in the web as well. And I linked a few tutorials for here for like whichever like web hoster you fancy. So like DigitalOcean, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure. I've used like all of them and I think they're all great, whichever, and they all have like free credits. So I think it's really great for, especially if you're just starting out with like learning how to do web development and you're using Flask. You can easily learn the basics of like setting up a web server and host it on the web using any of these tutorials and figure out like how to use Nginx, stuff like that. And you can configure it even further with like HTTPS, like all those other certificates that you want to make your site a little bit more secure. So those are some resources that I think are really great to check out if you want to launch like your Flask project on the web. Cool. And I think something also important that I discovered later on for this project is the importance of testing your code, especially if you're working on an open source project. It's really important to verify like the pull requests from others and make sure that their code is up to standard to whatever guidelines you set out, whether it's like the syntax or more on the back end, make sure that the code doesn't create any unsavory issues with the back end, whether it's like manipulating certain like models and stuff like that. So something great for that is like on GitHub. So I host this this project on GitHub. Something cool you can do that you can easily test is you can run like a test every time someone opens a PR and submits it for basically checking if like the requirements run on like an Ubuntu image. So this is just an example of something you can do, and you can further customize this by like testing like your Flask app and integrate like the unit testing libraries from Flask and GitHub Actions. So that's something cool I wanted to mention as well. And let's see. Yeah, and other interesting use cases I've seen for Flask is for our course CS61A. So this is our intro to Python course. We have a queuing system for students. So if students want to come to office hours, they're usually like really packed, like at a public university. For our intro to Python course, there's like 1,000 students. So when it comes to office hours, there's like 20 to 30 students. And we want to implement like a fair system for students to get help. So we implement a queuing system and basically just go to the website and put their name up, and then we like come get them. So here's a demo, and I just wanted to show like a more complex example of Flask because Python Buddy is fairly simple, but I think it shows the power of how you can use Flask for like a multitude of like use cases. And this is like something that I thought was really interesting, how we use Flask for our queuing system. So cool. Yeah, so basically, you can log into this queuing system, and when office hours are open, there's something here where you can click and just add yourself to the queue, and then you can resolve it if you're a TA. And if we look at the code, it's fairly simple as well. It uses like a model, view, and controller framework. And yeah, so basically, like, if you want to dig into this is open source as well. I think it's interesting to compare like these different use cases for Flask to see like how it works in your situation if you want to use Flask. So, for example, you can have like have this functionality that helps you like manage different sessions and different like administrator privileges, and then you can also have different configurations that you want. And yeah, I think it's like pretty cool for like Flask to be used in like all these different use cases. And yeah, digging a little bit more deeply into Python Buddy, since we have like 2 more minutes. I think like what really struck me about Flask was how easy it was to like get started in general. So for me, when I started programming, I just had like a simple app.py, and basically I just ran like flask run to just like load it up and test it out, and that's basically it. And it was like really, really easy to test in general. And yeah, if I just go through just like basically the core like Flask code, you can see how easy it is to use Flask in general. So we just have like a few main functions. So here is just like the rendering of like the index page, like the main page you go to code out any sort of Python you want. And then this is the code that you use to trigger like the AJAX request. So if the user changes anything, it triggers the AJAX code in the backend and runs Pylon. And that's pretty much it. And then we have another AJAX request for running the code here. Running code here. And then we have some code to prevent people from doing too much and try to like execute a bunch of requests. And then we have code to just evaluate the pilot and format it in a way to display on the website. And then some other formatting stuff that I coded, other formatting stuff. And that's it. That's basically it. So that's what I think is really cool about Flask, is that with like only a few lines of, or a few functions, you can create something that's really powerful and meaningful to your community. And for my community, it's like for beginning programmers that maybe aren't sure if they're interested in programming and just want to jump right into programming. And and this has been like a really exciting process. So yeah, now that I went through Python Buddy, I'm happy to answer any questions about Python Buddy, Flask, just anything in general that I can speak about. And I'll just leave the screen off in my bio for anyone that wants to ask questions about my experiences as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you very much. Um, so we have a question here already. One question in Discord. So how is the Ajax request sent to backend run against the linter?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. Yeah, so basically, um, so on the client side, we detect actively to see if there's something that changes. So every time like there's a new piece of text in the text box, we trigger the Ajax request called check code. And in here, the way that we like run the pilot library is in the evaluate pilot function. So in evaluate pilot function, we create like a temp file here. And we basically run pilot on that file with the new text. And in like the production version of Python Buddy, we do it in a different way using Node.js. That doesn't create temporary files, but it's beyond the scope of like this Flask topic. But yeah, so this is how we did it initially. So we just create a bunch of temp files all the time. For production, we use Docker, so each session is different. So we just use the same file for each Docker session, since each Docker session is different for each user. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Ooh, thank you for answering it. Now, I saw you had a slide on security, but there is whenever attendees is asking, how do you make sure that no malicious code is executed, like executing bash commands?
Yeah, so there's this interesting project called Python Sandbox that looked at ways to sandbox Python code, and basically his takeaway was that it's not possible to sandbox Python code. Basically, there's no way like on the web to like escape all like the bash scripts if you wanted to. So the way that we avoid that is, so my first attempt was basically to just like prevent certain libraries from being executed in Python, but someone would always find a workaround for that. So I just punted on that and created a different version of Python Buddy where um, we create like a virtual environment for each user that uses Python Buddy. Um, and basically, if you use too much memory, if you're running a script that like creates a bunch of files, for example, we basically just like ban your IP and prevent you from using Python Buddy. So it's not the greatest solution in the world. Like it's not the most efficient one, but it's something that works for my use case, since we're not like serving a million users, but we do serve like hundreds to thousands of users, and it works. So yeah, basically, just to summarize, we just create like a microservice container. So like a machine for each user. And if they basically mess it up, they're messing up their own like machine. Um, and we just ban their IP if they do that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Perfect. So I don't think we're going to be able to put another question, to insert another question in. But if Ethan is in the mood to go back to Discord, everyone is more than welcome to ask questions in Discord then.
Sweet. Sounds good. I'll post a presentation in the Discord, which has more information on how to reach out to me if you want to talk. Sweet. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for a great presentation. Wonderful.
Yeah. Take care.